Folks, we're going to try to keep this thing on time. I'm Rooter Bright. I'm one of the National GLC board members from Texas. It's my pleasure to introduce Jen Colby and Karen Hoffman. I believe they're going to bring.
We don't have Karen this time, unfortunately.
Oh, no,
No.
Jennifer.
I'm
Yeah,
Jen.
Kimberly.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So
Okay.
unfortunately, we lost our third partner because
Okay.
she wasn't allowed to travel because she works her day job is within RCS. So she was
Great.
not able to.
Yeah. Bureaucracy.
We'll do our best in her.
Fortunately, the rest of us, we're going to share whatever disease we have, we'll share it, we'll get over it, we'll live through it. So, anyway, this is something all of us do. Anything we can do to understand better, to have a better awareness of it, these ladies are going to help us on it. So, turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rooter. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Jen Colby, and with my colleague Kimberly Hagan, we're going to share some of the stories. We've been longtime extension folks. We've worked with lots of other farmers around Vermont and New England, the Northeast, and we're going to share the stories of what we've been seeing on our farms and the changes that we've made. And then our third partner in crime, we're in Vermont. Our third partner in crime was Karen Hoffman. She's in New York, and she's seen similar results, but was unable to join us this time around. So we'll do our best, and thank Karen for being willing to be along in this as well. So our theme is really about returning life to the soil, and we're all fairly low input farmers, and we are all using small ruminants and up in the Northeast. So we have a little bit different water level than lots of the folks in the West. I was on a trip earlier this year, and folks in Southeast Colorado were asking me how much rain we get, because they get 7 to 10 inches a year. And I finally got so embarrassed after the whole week of being asked that I finally had to look it up. So for us in Vermont, central Vermont, we get 51 inches of rain on average a year between rain and snow. So it's a really different place. We have some different challenges, which is sometimes too much water, often too much water. So I'll do my presentation, and then I'll switch over to Kimberly. She'll share some of her experiences too. So we have these two different themes under our overarching theme. So I really feel like a lot of what I've been doing has been adventures and really trying to reclaim our hill farm, which is super steep. And has been managed in a pretty conventional overgrazing way for multiple generations. So I'm trying to rebuild what that started at when we received it. A little bit of my background. I've been farming in 4 locations, but 3 with ruminant livestock in the last 21 years, written multiple business plans. The goal has always been to have a profitable business. Hasn't always been that until more recently. And my work with Extension has really allowed the opportunity to learn from many other farmers and ranchers around New England, across the country, and including hosting and organizing conferences. And you've been on probably half of them, 300 pasture walks over, you learn a lot from different folks. I've worked with 5 different livestock species, and the goal has always been being really low input and pretty low budget. So I don't own a tractor. I've never owned a tractor. I do field large round bales. You have to be really creative when you do that. And I've never had the expensive tractors either. So that just sort of formulates a lot of my attitude toward doing what I'm doing. So the different tactics that I really tried to use, I love that Meredith just said adhering to the soil health principles, because that's essentially what I am doing. I didn't know that was called for a long time, but it's about long rest periods, short occupation periods. It's about incorporating multi-species. Our farm is very steep, and you'll see pictures of it. And so it's not so appropriate for cattle. It's very appropriate for goats and for sheep, or sheep and goats. I've been doing some selective cutting. That's where our bar chain reference comes from, if you didn't catch that. So we've all been doing some different chainsaw work over time too. A lot of bale grazing has been a tool, and observation is the biggest tool that any of us have as grazers, I think. makes a lot of difference and change. Decision-making change. So I don't cut, I don't clip, like I said, I don't have a tractor. We don't hay on our land either, so there's been no mechanical harvest. Our soils are really, really thin. It's on top of ledge, so there's no tilling. That's not an option. I haven't tried any overseeding at all other than bale grazing, and I've had lots of folks say, you know, what you really need to do is lime it. And I've never limed it because I'm kind of curious about how the changes go without liming it, since so many folks do that. So the property that we bought, so I've been in multiple locations. So the current property is we bought about 5 years ago. It has they're complex soils. I always think that's like the joke is they have a complex because they kind of do. These soils have an inferiority complex. But it basically has meant that pros and cons, so we didn't qualify for FSA because the soils are terrible. We paid full ride for this because the land trust didn't want to put any easements on it. So the good and bad part of that is we didn't get help, and at the same time we don't have any limitations on it that come with some of those things. So there's good and bad parts of that. The property is about 88 acres. It's 23 acres open. And the pH, the best pH was a 5.2, which in the Northeast, going acidic is actually pretty easy for us to do. We grow a lot of pine, and that will definitely carry our soils toward acidity. But as you probably know, grass really doesn't grow until you get above 5, 5.5. Clover doesn't really come until you get to 6, 6.5 pH. And so what would this actually grow? Well, it actually grew a lot of moss, and there wasn't a lot of sunlight on it. In different parts, it's wooded around the outside. I've got a map of the property over here if anybody wants to look at it afterward. And so I took some pictures in the beginning that were about, so this is sort of some of the worst where there's almost no grass. We had some sort of medium, yes, there was a little bit of grass locations, not great quality stuff. And then there was the site of the old barn that we tore down, and the soil under it was dark and rich. And this is what grew the summer after we tore that barn down. This was what I consider to be the soil that this farm had that people messed up. So all of the rest of the farm, my goal is to get it back to this, which is to get it back to that original state, if I possibly can. So, so there's a little bit of everything in there. It's not a Photoshop picture. That is actually the color of that. And I'm on a quest to get the whole farm to look like that. We are so far from that. But I'm seeing progress. So some of the different tools that I've been using have included grazing management. And I am primarily working with sheep, and I love hair sheep. They're super low maintenance. They're very easy. I don't have to do a lot with them. I don't really have to worry about running them through the burdocks because I don't have a lovely wool product that I'm concerned about managing, or and so very low input, and they're excellent grazers. So. And I've, been running somewhere between 30 and 70 animals, and that number, the capacity of the land has increased over the last 5 years. So we're at the upper edge of that now, and I'm anticipating that's going to continue. So depending, I've worked with 1/8 of an acre to an acre paddock sizes using predominantly net fencing. I do try to move them every single day, if at all possible. I get a little lazy. We get into the later fall, and I'm a little tired at that point, and I don't want to move them every day. But we don't need to so much at that point either. So I did the calculation, so roughly 40,000 pounds in stock density. And because I am not clipping and because I am just running ruminants, I want to make sure, and because I'm trying to reclaim this land, I'm running a really long recovery period. So we'll talk about some good and bad things about that, because there are some good and bad things about that too. But that's really aimed at the parasite management side, so that we are swinging around and we're breaking up the parasite cycle. We're not in that ideal 21-day parasite cycle. 2 years ago, I also I switched over to a May-June lambing system. I used to lamb in sort of March, April in a shed, and now we actually lamb on pasture in May and June. I don't lose any lambs. They're healthy. That has worked really well. But what that's also meant is that I've had to adjust. I have more of a mob in the summer, so that's been great for land impacts, but it also means that I have to be really on top of making sure that they have adequate, high-quality feed to choose from. And because I don't clip, sometimes that does mean over-mature stuff, and I have to be okay with that. And sometimes it's kind of ugly, because there's lots of standing over-mature stuff, and I have to be okay with that too. So that's been part of my changing my eye away from everything trying to be in a grazing wedge and really vegetative and lush. Well, it's not always an option. Ooh. So the tools, and I don't have cows, but I love this slide because we have to think about our management. There are teeth, there's saliva, there are hooves, there's physical impact, there's manure. So we have all of these tools sub-tools built into this one tool, and we can beneficially or negatively impact the environment. I love that Meredith pulled out, it's not the cow, it's the how. I wish I had a better, it's the sheep, like I can't come up with the right thing to say about the sheep, but it is exactly the same kind of a thing. We can use these tools, and I absolutely love the use of this tool. So another tool that I have been using has been Bale grazing, and I've done that in a bunch of different ways, and it's evolved over time for this property and also just sort of looking at the results. I've set bales or had squares and carried large armfuls of that around and spread it in different places. I've done some unrolled. I've set up square bales and actually just cut the strings on them in different places. I've set up wintering areas in groups of trees and fed in those places to build up the organic matter, to concentrate the manure. And I've now I tend to wean now the first weekend in September, which is a little weird because I used to do that in July. It was like a 4th of July festive thing to wean. They didn't think it was festive. I thought it was festive. So I'm actually doing that, picking pasture areas or areas where I'm getting some secondary regrowth coming in, where I'm setting up the lambs in that area, and I am bringing them feed, but that hay and that concentrated manure is a place, like it's just a little pen, but it's an extra place where we're building up the soil organic matter. And then I'm also doing some stuff in around bale feeding to try to increase some grass growth in some silvopasture areas. We don't have any really formal, like those couple of beautiful pictures that Meredith just showed about the cows, going through these large wooded areas. We haven't done that. We haven't done selective thinning in that way. But I am trying to capture a little bit more sun in grass by feeding some hay in some woods edge areas. So this is just one of those examples. So this was back in 2016, and boy, that's super slow. It's very exciting. So just above the words. Oh wait, do you have the thing? It's right there. Oh sweet. Just to give you what it looks like. So right here, I call that the shoulder of the hill. It is very, very, very thin and it's it's full of essentially bed straw, which I don't know if you folks are familiar with or not, but it has a growth pattern where it grows up tall, it likes to flop over, it likes to shade out everything else. And so when you have bed straw, you tend to not have a lot of undergrowth. So when the animals come through and they eat it, you get a lot of bare soil underneath. So there's nothing to protect the soil there. It grows back really slowly. It doesn't branch out like some of the more desirable plants do. It is it is very nutritious at different times in its life, so it's not a bad thing to necessarily have in your healthy system. I actually like it in other places. But when it crowds out everything else, it's just not that desirable. So this was back in 2016, and it was one of the places where I just said, we need to do something. So this is back when I first started doing bale feeding on this, and that was that shoulder of the hill. And like we're this far away from bare rock in some of these spots. And I basically just took large armfuls and took them out and spread it around. And within 2 weeks, I was starting to see this lovely regrowth that came up, and I was like, "Oh, this is fantastic. How do I do more of that in places?" And what was also really exciting was other parts of the pastures were not growing back at that time in the same way because it was a really low rainfall period. And this was the first fall that we ever grazed this property. So we bought it in July and we grazed the whole place just to start to stimulate some growth and just to get biology back onto it from the ruminant animals in some kind of a way and just start to wake it up a little bit. And so then if you look where that red arrow is, that was about a month later, and you could see that there's so much more growth coming. And I just want to so this was 2016, and look at that hillside on the right and the size of those trees. Just plant that in your mind for later. And that's a very steep hillside. It's a little tough to tell, but very, very steep. So back at one of our previous locations, I was doing a winter feeding program where I would feed animals in a year, and we would and then the next winter I'd move them to another location. And so pros and cons of that, of course, is if you feed a great concentration of hay in an area, then it snuffs things out. And there's a certain amount of that that's snuffed out. And so this was originally fed in the winter of 2013, 2014. So you can see the left side is what it looked like snuffed. Then we went over the next year, and the diversity and color of that just gives you a sense of what that's like. So if we can be a little bit patient, ooh, I think this feeds into your theme too. Sweet, I love it. If we can be a little patient, we actually get more out of it in the next. So I sort of had that result in my head. And that's when I started to actually feed in concentrated areas, just recognizing our soils are so incredibly thin that spreading a little bit of hay around isn't going to get the growing medium that I need to be able to really grow strong plants. So I started to test a couple of different things. And just to compare, so you can see the picture on the left, we had a ring. You can sort of see the buffering around that. And then I had a place where I ran through the net fence, and you could see the difference between where the formerly bale grazed area was and all the rest it got. So that's basically your pre-grazing. And your post-grazing is that sort of upper part, the grazing and hay combo. But you can see what they had to graze. And that was simply 3 months after feeding a bale in that spot. It was incredible, and that was not an area that had that. It was very thin soils again and very poor quality stuff. And then this summer I went and I took a picture of, and it's just a square at the edge of the woods, a rectangle, where there was a metal pen where last year's weaned lambs went. And I actually had sheep who got out of the fence. I had a ewe who got out of the fence and taught her lamb to get out of the fence, and they went around to this area. They found this and grazed there because they said, this is better than what you're giving us right now. So just incredible. So I put them in a totally different area this year so we can build that up. And then, so what I've also started to do around being really proactive with how I'm using Bale grazing is, I had a bunch of travel this year. I'm sure lots of folks didn't have a lot of travel last year. A lot of folks seem to have a lot of travel this year, and I was no exception. And so what I very intentionally did was set bales, instead of trying to have my farm care person learn how to graze well or follow my directions or really, be teaching someone. So I have just a part-time person, on call, and she's got a lot to learn. She's a long ways away from understanding grazing well. And so I figured the best way to do this would be to intentionally plant bales in places and just give her very simple instructions and see how it went. And so there were areas, so I had 3 trips this year where we did this, and they overgrazed the heck out of it in those areas, and they spread a whole bunch of hay, and then we left it alone. So the picture on the left was just sort of the residual of that, and that was in July. And then the picture on the right is what that looked like in September. And just radically different in terms of the amount of forage that it was producing. And then this was a trip from August, and I did paddocks around each of those. So every 3 days, she opened it up, and there was a new bale that was available to them. And on the left, I actually don't know. It's a cinquefoil species. I don't actually know what this species is, but it's got spines on it. They do not like to eat it. It does not have a good soil cover. And so on the right is inside the fence where those bales were. So I'm starting to use the animals and their impact to knock back the stuff that we don't like, but trying to maintain the animal health and nutrition level by making sure that they have bales. So there's all of these things together, because I used to just push them and make them try to eat this stuff, and that really knocks them back. It's tough when you're trying to balance animal performance and land management together. So this is a nice combo. I found this to be a pretty nice combo. And then, so I don't know if you can see the red line, but this is a former bale that I documented this year. It's probably from 2 years ago. So where the central part of the bale was, it's still what that original material was. So it's a whole bunch of fern and some grass, a little bit of grass, but a lot of fern. And then this is the ring that was outside of that, which is almost entirely white clover at this point. It's another one of those places where if the sheep get out, they don't get out that often. But if the sheep get out, or when I do a new paddock in that area, it is what they go to first. And they graze it almost down to nothing, and then it comes back because we give it lots of time to rest. So those places, it's kind of wild. And if you do come up and take a look at this map, there are these spaces where I can walk to a place in the pasture and say, oh, this is exactly where there was a bale 2 years ago, because you can see that ring, or you can see that diversity, and around it is nothing. I shouldn't say nothing. I mean, I've spent some time in Montana recently in the drought this year, and those folks were absolutely grazing some nothing, amazingly. But for us, bare rock, so really unpreferred species, those kinds of things, will have brownness next to these green rings. So one of the other big tools, I think it's actually my biggest tool of all of them, is other than just a general sense of curiosity, is just really focusing on observation. What am I seeing in the animals? What are they choosing to eat? Where are they choosing to eat? Are they vocalizing? Do they want to move before I think they should move? All of those things. And one of the tricks I've really come to admire as well is a lot of photo documentation and standing in the same place and taking pictures across, which we see a lot. We see a lot of those like fence line across pictures, but it's also misleading. So if you look across this particular photo, which is at the top, these are all taken from the same spot. So bringing my camera down, so it looks like there's not a lot of good stuff in that. And the picture, if we go clockwise, so the picture on the right bottom is sort of a 3/4 down, and then at my feet is the picture on the bottom left. So looking across at the top picture is actually really discouraging. there's tons of, goldenrod and ferns and all kinds of stuff, and at the same time, recognizing that that is a view who's looking across, but we also have to look down because we have to see what's actually at our feet to recognize what's really going on, what the animals are actually eating. I just have found that to be really helpful for me. And this is the location where that moss picture was taken. 3 years after, no, a year after. It looks different now as well. I didn't bring a picture in the slide deck of what it looks like now, but it looks different again. It's wild. It's continuing to evolve. So, and then I did another one of those across pictures, and so this is from this year, and this was a very diverse area, and with my slow rotation, some things have actually been changing there. It was much more vegetative, and again, this is a little depressing in the sense that this, I think, was probably July, so things are headed out. They're a little bit more mature, and then going down, I'm starting to see clover. And so I started with a very acidic farm, and it is still a largely acidic farm when you take soil tests, although those are changing, even without lime. But the thing that has been just an incredible indicator for me that things are headed in the right direction is that we have clover all over the place now. And if you look at the soil tests, you would say there is no place on this entire farm that red clover is going to grow. And that's not true. I have so much red clover. It's not everywhere. There's so many places it's not yet. Faye? Did you plant it? I never planted a thing. I have not seeded a single thing on this farm outside of Bale's. So in the full disclosure, in the beginning, I did, extension person, my observational hat on and my experimental hat on, and I thought, oh, that super steep hillside where those little pine saplings were, that's a perfect place for me to do simple observational studies. I'll put some lime in a strip down. I will just graze a strip down. I will, I'll do some plantings. So you could have these wonderful, I didn't have any money. By the time we bought the farm, we didn't have any money for that stuff. And now I don't actually want to do that because I'm in this experiment that is much more interesting to me. How do we change this without those external inputs? So I don't know. I actually had someone recently try to get me on a CIG grant, and they want to have me do some seeding. And I said, well, I'm okay to do that in a place, but I don't want to seed the whole farm because I'm on this other experiment now. And so far, it's been really rewarding. And so this is our 5th year, full year there. And we had said to many of the farmers that we work with over the years, really, in our climate, please don't expect you're really going to see major changes for at least 3 years. Like really 3 to 5 years is when you really start to see stuff. And I recognize in the West it's even longer lots of times. But this is, now I'm in 5th year, and now we're really starting to see some stuff.
Have you thought to soil test where you don't have clover yet to see if those pH levels are still depressed versus when you do have clover to see if they're coming up?
That is a really excellent question about, yes. So I'll just repeat that so it's on the recording too. Have we soil tested in places where both The clover is coming, and in places that we haven't, so that we can see if the pH has changed in those. So I am actually soil testing the 4 major soil types. So the 4 places that I soil tested when we were buying the farm as my starting condition, and then I'm doing a zigzag pattern in different places. We actually have clover coming everywhere. So that is appears to be much more connected to where the animals have been than the soil type. But really excellent question. And I even if I have these pictures where I'm showing like really amazing grass, I do not want to give the impression that the whole farm looks like this. There are places that are amazing, and there are places that are absolutely not amazing. And so then this picture on the right, I think that was probably, we were getting our roof replaced, so that would be 2019. Notice those trees are a little bit bigger than they were. In the last couple of years, we've added multi-species in. So we added in some goats because when you are in our climate, if you have a really slow rotation, it tends to grow trees. It's like succession does its thing. And so we have tons and tons of maple seedlings coming up in our pastures. It's not as open, we're not mechanically harvesting. So if we bush hogged the thing, we would absolutely have a lot more open space. But what I'm trying to do is that balance, that later picture that Meredith posted with the monocrop and the very few species versus the multi-tiered ecosystem and the many species. That's what I'm trying to do. And I'm kind of along on this ride. So I thought, I don't want to speed up my rotation. I like this long rotation. I think it's managing the land well. But how do I manage all of these saplings? Because I don't want an entirely silvopasture-based, I want to have open land. So we started adding in some goats. And what is amazing, if you're familiar at all with Kathy Voth's work on teaching livestock to eat weeds, the goats are teaching the lambs to browse. I mean, I already had some sheep that had some browsing habits. These are browsing a lot now. And the goats climb trees. I do have a video I'd be happy to share that's not in the presentation of the mechanism of how the goats and the sheep are interacting with each other, and the goats actually taking down trees. Pretty awesome to watch. But they are looking for completely different things. Every single paddock that they go into, the goats go in one direction and the sheep go in another direction. And so adding goats to sheep has not meant that I have less forage. It actually means that I have more. It's kind of awesome. So this was the video of the goats and the sheep working together. Will it work? I don't think it will work. I will give it a shot, but I don't think it will work. Yeah, QuickTime is not available. Okay, we'll move on. Okay, so back to the trees. So this was 2016, 5 years ago. Look at those trees on that hill. And then we have a winter picture of, look at those trees on that hill. And so you can see the little road as there we go. This is sort of the little farm road. That's that shoulder of the hill where I started Bale grazing back in the day. And now, look at that road. And look at those trees. They are so big and tall now. So we have been cutting some of the trees, and we cut the trees on the lower side because we're going to do some biodiversity planting there. And the trees on the upper side are getting bigger, bigger, bigger. So one of the pieces of advice that I have been given many times by people who love equipment is you should cut all of that right now. Back when it was much smaller, they said you should brush hog that right now. And so you get rid of all of those. And again, I'm on this experiment. What's going to grow here? What do we have, for biodiversity? It's here for a reason. I don't necessarily want it, but I'm trying to understand it. And so, like I said, what I've been trying to do is to bring in some of these tools of the goats and some Bale work, and I have been dropping bales into the woods to give the goats and sheep plenty to eat while they work on, I don't know how well you can see that, but the goats, mostly goats, have completely stripped these. But I still want to make sure everybody has enough to eat. So this is an option, not a requirement. And the option is, yes, they are taking them out. We have an entire section where I will just go along with loppers or a chainsaw next year and just take it out and we'll have open pasture again. And it fed really nice, fat, happy goats that went to auction at a really good price. So everybody won. So, and then the goats are even stripping some of the pines, but not enough of the pines, unfortunately. But they are stripping the pines, and they are teaching the lambs how to strip the pines too. So when we go back to that upper hill and all of those huge pine trees, something that I happened to notice a couple of years ago, because the biology of the soil was changing, the grass was changing, was, why is it that I'm seeing really, really nice stuff showing up in these sort of wasn't random, but in these places near these pine trees? And I also don't know if you're noticing, but there's some dieback happening in this. And I think that's kind of fascinating too. I've been watching some of these trees have been dying back, and I think it might be because we're changing the pH. That's my theory. We'll see. So what I've come to realize, and so I've been watching more and more of these, I've been documenting it more and more, is, and this is really what the hillside looks like. So again, thin soil is not desirable. So why is it so nice over here? Well, this is the lowest edge. This is the lowest edge of that hillside. So the sheep and goats are going from an open area that they're grazing, and they're going to shelter in the sun underneath these pine trees. They get up, and what do animals do when they get up after laying down? So they're dropping manure, they're dropping urine, their bodies are pressing down on that as well. They're causing, causing animal impact in that way. And so I don't want to cut all of those trees, because if I did that, they wouldn't have that behavior. So I'm kind of glad I didn't, because I got the opportunity to actually observe this. So what my approach is going to be from now is in order to build this whole hillside back up, because overgrazed hillside, all of this wonderful soil just went down at the bottom of it's very frustrating. And so how do we get it back up there without mechanical use, without other amendments? And I'm just going to work away with the chainsaw cutting the front edge of that. And then we're going to build the next layer up, because they're going to hang out under those trees. And then I'm going to cut that layer. And it's going to be over a few years, but I think we can actually really get high quality pasture on a hillside, and because we're starting to see it. We're starting to see it in this small way. And so some of the results. So we're still, this is still early, but we're starting to see some actual demonstrable results. So the soil organic matter has increased in these 4 locations, 4 different soil types, an average of 2.3%, which is, we're not a big place. Imagine what it could be with a soil organic matter change like that. If we were, a place with hundreds or thousands of acres, we're not that. But if just my moving sheep every day has allowed us to hold 1.3 million gallons of additional water, our farm is actually between 2 waterways. It's a high point, and we shed off into 2 different waterways that run ultimately into the Connecticut River, which is what feeds Long Island Sound. So I take that responsibility pretty seriously. And the other thing that I didn't end up on the slide is, so the pH has changed, an average of 0.01. No, 0.1. It's changed an average of 0.1, which is a huge change for pH, because it's on a logarithmic scale. So it's a small change in pH is actually huge and very, very challenging to do. So that really exciting as well. So I have lots and lots more to do and improve. And so the goal is to go from that part on the right and have it look a whole lot more like the part on the left. I have a lot more years to do that with. So I'm going to hand it over to Kimberly and to take it from there, and we'll do questions at the end. So,
Oh,
does that
yeah,
work?
that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, does that work?
Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
All right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pass it off to Kimberly.
All right. Well, there's a lot of similarities between us. You'll see that. Like Jen, I bought a piece of land with my husband we bought it 35 years ago. And it had been farmed for years and then neglected for, 20 years, nothing. And then a local person, he came and would take a hay crop off of it. Maybe once a year, maybe every other year. But mostly it was a buildup of thatch from neglect. And it was, I'll show you some pictures in a little bit. But first I'll tell you about myself a little bit. I farmed sheep for 34 years on that piece of land. We got it because it was so cheap. It's basically a gravel pit. It is a little bit different than most of Vermont, which is what I say stony, bony, and not loamy. It's we don't have much soil, and I'm one of those places that what I do have is it's a glacial outwash, so it's a gravel pit. I spent a decade as the grazing specialist at the University of Vermont with the Center for Sustainable Agriculture, working with Jen. And we did a lot of great work, helping a lot of small farms just like ours to help them improve as best as we could. And a lot of us, we don't have big tools. For myself, I knew that I was limited because it was just me. I really, would bring in help here once in a while, here and there with high school students. But mostly it was just me all the time. So you really have to make your decisions very calculated and what your energy level is and what you really can do. I studied environmental biology at Antioch, New England, and I looked at a lot of different ecosystems to understand how they work. And I also went, when I was even younger, and I visited farms all over the world and worked on a lot of different farms in different countries. So then I felt like I was ready to try something on my own. And then the last thing, which I did in the last year of my job with UVM, I started with one of the farmers I worked with. We started this thing called Fluffy Butt Fridays to keep ourselves laughing through some of the hard stuff that you have to go through, especially when you're dealing with a lot of rain. We had a few summers where it just never stopped raining. And that's tough when you've got sheep, keeping them healthy and keeping them moving. So we did that for fun, and the picture way over on the right is one of the pictures we would post back and forth to each other. So that was some of my lambs diving into a hedgerow of curly dock, which we have a lot of. So the farm I have, as I said, is a gravel pit. So this is the north branch of the Winooski River, which comes down. There's a big reservoir down here because there's a dam, for power. And this is there's a couple of brooks that comes down off this. You can see right there, and then there's another one comes here off this steep hillside, and that's where it kind of scours out. And this field is basically just a big outwash, and then it goes down. And so here's that big field. And it was 90% goldenrod, and the other 30% that was squished in between there was bedstraw. And that's about what I had. I was so excited. I found one clover plant that first year, and I was pretty excited because I walked every square inch trying to find something. So I got sheep, partly because I'm really interested in wool, but of course meat is also part of the package. and started working with putting them. I just had 2 big pastures back then, and I just put them out. And then halfway through the summer, put them in the other one. And then I started boarding a couple of horses for some local people. So I put them in there too. And it wasn't long, within another year, and I was finding that by end of July, I was done. There was nothing left. And I was feeding hay. And I said, okay, well, this doesn't work. And that's when I first started hearing about some of this rotational grazing. So I started reading about it, and I went to some workshops and started talking to people about it. And I divided up my place into small pastures. And like Jen, I used goats. I used chickens. I didn't ever get to pigs. I decided that it was a little bit too fragile of an environment for where I was. And then I did, in a couple of years, I also did some experiments where I did a trade with some local people where I shipped all my sheep to their farm and I took their cows for the summer because I needed a little bit heavier impact. I wanted something that I needed to break up, the thatch was still pretty thick. So I wanted to break up some of that and get a little bit heavier impact on the land. So we did that, and some bigger cow patties. I needed a little bit bigger of a dump of manure. So I did that, and then I brought the sheep back the next year, and then a few years later, we repeated the whole thing. And I was pretty happy with the results. It was really interesting to see. And that's the other thing is I also, like Jen, I tell the farmers that I work with, your best tool and your cheapest tool is your own 2 eyes. Just, this is a conversation. I can't give anyone a real direct formula on what's going to work for your place. You have to get out there and you have to get down on the ground and you have to look as Jen was saying, take pictures and look at what's at your feet as well as the long view. And just really pay attention and listen to that conversation. Listen to what the land is trying to tell you, what the animals are saying too. Because they are very vocal when they don't like what you're giving them. So some of this you already know. This is part of some of my extension work, but this is one of the workshops that we did, those that Jen and I were working with other extension people, and we dug this soil pit, and you can see that we have someone down there, and they were like 4 feet deep. Just to show people, we wanted people to get down in the pit and see where those roots were. And this was a farm that had been doing rotational grazing this was the Wells in 20 years working on this, and we dug this pit. And so it was great. Everybody got to get down in there and see how far down those roots went. And just basic thing, what we really try to explain to people is that, if we can build up that organic matter, just 1 acre, if you get 1% more, you can hold another 20 to 26,000 gallons of water. So on a place like mine, that was really important. I was lucky that I had so many years of rain because I had great grass, and it really helped me build up the organic matter. But in summers that are really dry, I have to be really careful. I have to really watch. Even now, 30 years later, I'm very, very careful at how I do the rotation. So there's a lot of ways to go about building that soil. You can do it fast if you have a lot of money and you got a lot of equipment, and you can just, and I've seen a lot of people do it, just go out and just put all kinds of, just pour the stuff on, spend a lot of money and their tractor out there putting amendments on. The other way is low cost, but it's slow, and the change is pretty incremental. And that was a little bit frustrating for me when I was first starting this rotational grazing. It's like, wow, I'm really not seeing a whole lot of change really fast here, and this is going to take me my whole life. And I heard about someone, I think it was at a grazing conference, one of the national grazing conferences, that had put some hay out, a hay bale, and they had taken some pictures of it, and I really liked what I saw. So I started experimenting with that a lot, and it became pretty much what I did on my fields. So I'd pick the worst area, and every winter I would have the farmer that I bought hay from, he would bring over, and I would set up this checkerboard of round bales. And they would each one they would get to have, well, sometimes I'd give them 2, but they could eat it right down. And I left it in big piles. I did not tease it out. So, one of the biggest arguments I hear against this is people say you waste so much hay, but it isn't a waste. It's really, for one thing, it helped me save time because I wasn't going out there every day to feed the animals. They were eating 24/7 as much as they wanted, and they could just hang out there, and they did. And they would lay on the hay and just drop their manure and urine all winter long. So I didn't have as much work in the winter as I usually do. And then I saved on the fencing because I wasn't, moving fence around. And then what else did I say here? Well, it's environmentally friendly because you're not burning fossil fuels to move it with a tractor. It's already set up out there, and it saves time. Oh, and here's some calculations. So figuring out when you have to figure out how much you need or how much the animals would need. So one cow at 1,400 pounds and 2.7% of their body weight, so they need about 37 pounds of dry matter. And if you multiply that by a herd of 200 head, you're going to need 7,560 pounds of dry matter. So that's it's a lot. And then you also, I would tell, you figure out that you need to add in another 200 just for the trampling and soil building because they're going to trample on a lot of that and they're not going to eat it. And then this was the calculation for sheep. So in the spring, this is what my fields would look like. Whoops, something didn't transfer. Oh well. But you can see all the residual, and it would leave kind of a lump there. I also, boy, it transferred the wrong thing. Anyway, that's I did also put, like Jen, I put bales down in the woods, and it was, I was really happy with what happened with that too. It was great. It really changes the feed matter, and the ground cover. What I really liked is there had been so much bare soil under there because the grasses had flopped over and the plants had flopped over. So there's a lot of bare soil. And once they got in there and started chewing on things and the sunlight got down there, all of a sudden I had all kinds of feed in there for them. And here you can see later in the spring, these were last year's round bales all the way down this row. And I would just leave them, and I would not put them to graze on that area, usually until August of the next year. And then you can see the variety. I had clover coming in. I would also throw in some radishes once in a while. Not too much because it's expensive seed, but you can just see the change in the variety and the color and just the abundance of the grass there too. And this particular paddock really could only support about 4 sheep when I first started, and now I had at the top of my production I had 50 sheep. The other interesting thing that I noticed is it obviously was bringing in insect life because there was, all of a sudden I started having these, and these are from skunks coming in to dig down for the bugs. So that was pretty exciting. I had to see that there was this whole ecosystem that had come to life and was popping back up again. The other thing I did was I did a comparison with a penetrometer. I looked at the difference between the areas where I'd had bale grazing and where I didn't. And this is, you can see, it was pretty dramatic. So this was where the compaction, where the penetrometer would hit the compaction. So if you look at the, so these are the bale grazed areas. So it was really dramatic what happened. That ground just really opened up, and a lot more water was able to soak in, and a lot more of the nutrients, and just enriched that soil tremendously. That was pretty exciting.
So you're showing less compaction near the bale grade?
Right, yeah. That I could get the penetrometer to go like that far before it hit the compaction level. And with right outside that bale grazed circle, that's what it was. It wasn't very far.
How far apart would those two locations have been?
So I would do the readings like right in the ring, and then I would just go right outside the ring right here to get the, yep. And this was some work that was done in Canada, and I did some testing on my place as well, and it was pretty astounding. Approximately 160 pounds of trampled hay left from a 1,200-pound bale. You're going to get 34% nitrogen from that hay and 38% nitrogen excreted from the animals retained on that spot. And then 22% of the phosphorus was retained from the hay and the livestock. And that was pretty close to what we found at my place too. And this was in, I think it was Manitoba where they did this study, the University of Manitoba. So we lose a lot through the volatilization when we're spreading. And the other thing was, I don't know if that's the references, as Jen showed the picture of the cow patty, the dung beetles and the work that they do. I did have some pictures and I wasn't able to find them, but I have, as Meredith was speaking about this morning, I mean, yeah, I have dozens of dung patty pictures. It's interesting. I've been trying to see about with sheep manure. And I've noticed that, like in the early spring, when they first start eating green grass, and it's a little more, their manure is a lot more loose, I did see dung beetles on them. But later on, as you know, they have the pellets, and I was never able. I don't know if you have.
I haven't actually.
Yeah.
Not really seen them.
Yeah.
I see holes, but I have not actually seen dung beetles.
The dung beetles, yeah. It seems like they like a certain consistency. Yeah, I think it's pretty important to them. But anyway, they do, I mean, they're workhorses. They do more than I think anything could, any tractor equipment could do. They get that manure right down where we need it, right in that root zone. So they're essential. And that's one of the measures too. You can see how quickly your patties break down. If they're not breaking down very fast, then there's not a whole lot of cycling and life going on in that place. And there's nothing like putting animals on it to sort of kickstart and get that going again and get that nutrient cycling going. So
Related to that, can I ask you, so
What is the what's the length of time it took your pellets to break down when you first started? Because I'm just thinking about mine was longer than a year when I started.
Yeah, definitely. And now, I'm not really quite sure because I've not gone out. So I retired from sheep farming. I am now animal-less 3 years ago. I decided it was time. The challenges have gotten pretty great. I miss it terribly. I really, really enjoyed it. But I have grandchildren now, and I also, so many farms have disappeared from the valley that I live in that I don't have access to hay anymore. And there's not a vet, not that I really needed the vet much, but yeah, the challenges of trying to keep a farm going where I am, there's just no agricultural business going on in my area anymore. So it was pretty difficult. So I finally decided it was time. But my neighbors are all very sad. But yeah, I don't know. I know it was much quicker though, that it breaks down very fast. Yeah. I mean, you go out and you just don't see the pellets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Places that we hit multiple times in a season and I don't see pellets anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's when you know your microbiology is moving.
Really jump started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is the dominant grass species that both of y'all saw come back, was that fescue?
I tend to, I'm shooting for orchard grass. I mean that's a sign that I see a good grass that I really like. We don't have a whole lot of fescue where we are. Tends to be a little further south of us. But.
Well, I do have the, especially when I first bought the place, that was was this fine fescue, yeah, which nothing eats.
Yeah.
It likes really acidic conditions, and nothing else. If there's no sort of, it's in places that have been neglected for a long time. It's sort of a dead ground. That's what you see. But a lot of that disappeared. I mean, once I started doing the bale grazing, and I don't see nearly as much of that. You'll see it in the places where nothing, there hasn't been a lot of grazing pressure or the manure on it. Yeah.
Totally.
How do each of you handle the big ground bales without equipment?
Ooh, I wish I had included that picture. Couple of different ways. For years, so I've been doing round bales without a tractor for 9 years. Squares were just too much trouble. So for a long time, I just got deliveries. I went every week or so, every few days, and got my friend that I buy hay from, and he just puts the bales in the back of my truck, and we tip them out. That worked really well when I had a teenager at home, and I don't anymore. So then I have switched to, if I can find a place where there's a tree, I wrap a chain around it and I drive away, which has really, I learned very quickly to take the tailgate off. I can still close the tailgate, but you can see this big bend in the tailgate. That's really embarrassing. Everybody teases me about that.
I broke 2 tailgates.
So there's that. And now, actually, the last 2 seasons, and this has worked really well, is I took a page out of your book, and I now hire somebody to do the trucking all in one day. And that fellow comes up, drops his own tractor, and then goes back and gets the bales. And so he's placing them for me. And I do have pictures of that I could share with folks if they wanted to see them. So I just line them up now in a ring around my wintering area. And I'm just opening bale or 2 at a time. Yeah.
Did I see in that film correctly that the bales that you're getting are plastic wrap, so they're highly digestible? I mean, they're becoming silage, so to speak, in there. Now, you mentioned orchard grass. Are the bales orchard grass?
Were your bales?
It's a mixture.
Yeah.
It's
mine
whatever
kinda
was in that. There's a farm that I bought mine from because he had nice diverse. He did a really nice job of. He had really diverse pastures, well, hay fields, and he did this alternation where he had beef cows. So he would have his cows there for a couple of years, and then those would become hay fields, and then his hay fields, he'd move the beef. So I really liked his hay, and it was a nice mixture of clover and orchard grass, and very diverse. And so that seed was dropped, yeah.
So with cattle, you would have a pretty good hold there from bale grazing in a wet year, or is your soil, is it freezing at any point during the year?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They're frozen now.
Bunch.
Yep.
What would your recommendation
Oh, I think that's a really great question.
It is a really good question. I've wrestled with it a lot because I've been asked a lot. I know it's a real problem because especially like in Virginia too, where it freezes and thaws, and so you get a mess pretty quick. One thought I did have is, I mean, if you use smaller ones so they wouldn't be in one place for so long and move them along. The other thing was with this, it's not going to give you being able to get access to all of your pastures, but we did a couple of farms where we've been doing these wood chip pads. So the animals can hang out on this. It's a structure that's built. You know, you dig out, you scoop out like 2 feet of soil, fill that with gravel. Sometimes we had to put tiling in so that it would collect moisture and pipe it to a spot if it needed to have that done. And then you put 12 inches of wood chips on top of that. And so the animals really love that in the winter because it's warm and dry, even though it doesn't have an overhead. Even on snowing and rainy days, they liked it because it stays pretty dry. And they have access to that for lounging, and then you have a place where they can go and eat the hay for a while, but they tend to always come back there to lounge because it's so comfortable. So it's sort of an in-between step. It still doesn't quite get you like what we can do, but it still can get you like halfway there.
But that residual hay that is left on the ground from the cow, if you disc it into the soil, it would change the physical characteristics of the soil.
Yeah, I never did anything. I just left it. Yeah.
And I've hit some of the, I was only seeing the benefit of it for a while, and then I began to find I'd have these, it was almost too wet, like it would be too much compost, too thick, and it would hold too much water. Not that that's a bad thing, but it would actually, so that's when I've started to move animals around in more places to just try to distribute that a little bit. And why I think of folks with more equipment and little different approaches where they scrape up their yard and then they windrow all of that leaving in another place so they can break down some more. That might be a system to do as well if you have access to that equipment.
Yeah.
Or just move the animals because they have feet and legs.
I mean, I know one person in Virginia told me they were doing it and they left even the divots. They just left the whole mess and didn't come back to it till almost a year later.
Yeah.
And it kind of worked itself out.
So is it wet hay or is it dry?
We have different ones. Well, we've worked with different people because we're just far enough apart that we have different sources of hay. So yours has been drier, hasn't it?
Yeah, I would always have him save out some that he dried. They were still moist. They were still, it was ensiled, so it definitely had moisture in it. But I would ask him to dry it down as much as he could before ensiling it. I found that the animals, the sheep, the really wet ones, they just didn't like them as much. But some people had different experience.
Yeah, and we've had a whole range because there's a beef fellow that I buy hay from, and then there was a dairy fellow I've been buying hay from as well. And so the beef guy would get great second cut, pretty dry on that drier side, and the dairy guy, a lot more first cut and a lot wetter. So it was kind of interesting because they sometimes did like it more, and sometimes they preferred the second cut. So I've tried to give them some options. Right now they don't have options. So, but one of the things back when we started to feed the sheep from these round bales, I would get pushback from other sheep producers who would always say you can't feed round bales, ensiled, wet round bales. You can't feed those to sheep because they'll get listeria and they'll die. And I've been doing this, well, now almost 10 years with the round bales, 9 years anyway, and we've had 2 listeria bales, and the sheep don't want to eat those.
Right.
So they know that, and you can smell that. And it's just been really fascinating. And I hear the same thing with horses too. You can't feed horses from around Bale, and I know several farmers who do that as well. And it's a management thing. It's like there's so many things in this world. There isn't a you should always or you should never. Like there's
right.
times where it's appropriate and times where it's not appropriate. And
Yeah, and
Figure it
like
out.
we said, your best tool is observation.
Yeah.
One thing I did want to give a shout out again to is that Kathy Both has been such an instrumental part of all the work that I've done too. I learned so much from her, and my place is I mean, we brought her to my farm, we brought her to Vermont, and she came there and just opened my eyes. Here I thought I had nothing worth of value, and she taught me how to teach the animals to eat what I had. And it's really interesting what happens. And the mothers teach their young, and people were amazed. They'd come to my farm and see my sheep eating, weeds, worthless plants. And it was great. I mean, mine would go anywhere, and they'd eat any of these things, and they gain weight. There's a lot of nutrition in it. So I would always, when I went to a lot of the work that we did in extension, I'd always bring it up with the farmers I worked with, and as Jen can tell you, a lot of people didn't believe it, and still don't. And thinks that it's not worth the effort. And all I can say is it was great. It was really great. These are all plants have nutrition, and let's use it. It's what is growing there, and it works.
Did you guys ever consider soil building with manure, whether chicken, horse, rabbit? Did y'all do any of it, or just considered it?
I didn't hear the question. To do what?
Build your soil.
Oh.
Manure, whether it's chicken manure, horse manure, rabbit manure.
Yes. I had chickens for years and years. I had chickens, and I would follow after the sheep. I had this whole thing where the sheep, because they were my first product, so they got the best, the first digs. So they would graze a piece, and then I usually moved them once a day. One summer I did an experiment, and I moved them 3 times a day. It was a lot of work. They gained a lot of weight. They were so fat, but it was a lot of work. But anyway, the sheep got it first, and then after that, the horses would get that section, because then all the good stuff was gone. I wouldn't have to worry about them having really too nutritious grass, because they can founder. So they got second dibs, and then the chickens would get the last, and they would get to be in there. And then a lot of times partway through the summer, I would just stop moving the chickens so much, and I would just fence them into my orchard, which was great. They did a fantastic job eating all the little pests that bother apple and pear, and I have walnut trees and filberts. I have kiwis, and they just go in there, and they do a great job, and I have really nice fruit on my trees and walnut trees. The forester that came last year to check on my forests and see how they were doing. He kept looking at those. He goes, "Those aren't walnut trees, are they?" And I said, "Yeah, they are." And he goes,
What I had in mind was a bulk manure.
Yes.
spray.
"Oh, I see."
Did y'all do any of that, or considering that with any of those, whether it's horse manure, chicken manure, or
I never.
rabbit manure is good too. But
rabbit manure, is excellent too.
I never did.
So no, and that's been largely in our previous locations. That's largely been a lack of equipment, because I could have taken some of those wintering areas, scraped them up, and spread them in a different way. But lack of equipment meant that I didn't do that. And actually, at this current location, it's so steep. I mean, they used to hay it. I have no idea how they hayed it. So I don't feel like it's a super safe thing to run equipment on this. That is one of the ways to do. That's a little bit more of the hare and a little less of the tortoise.
Yeah.
There is,
I've done some of that.
Yeah.
and it will. I mean, it increases the organic matter. It does increase the soil biology right there. It certainly spreads nutrients.
And
Yeah.
we certainly have farmers that we work with that do it and love it.
Absolutely.
And, yeah.
Yeah.
Of course, you've got to have close access to that
economically to make it work.
Right.
Yes.
Right, and that's, yep. And that's
You
good
had a question?
too.
I heard a statement in the beginning about her farm being on the hillside and the soil being thin.
Yes.
You've increased your plant growth and you've increased your pH. You were sitting on parent material,
Yes.
and whatever process you did, you started to decrease or remove and turn the parent material into nutrients that could be used through the process that you were doing. I would assume that's how, without having to go out there and line, how you got the raise. And so it's like,
Yeah.
the biodiversity that helps break down the parent material is what's helping you.
Totally. And I used to have a colleague who had a PhD in soil science, and I have a background in animal science. And I don't have a formal education in soil science. And I used to hear that person arguing with other sort of more regenerative ag-oriented folks, and there would be this argument about building topsoil, and that takes thousands of years. And I've just stopped looking at it that way. I'm adding more growing medium. So I don't care what I call it. I don't care what anybody calls it. But we've got more growing medium, and we can put that right on top of the rocks, and we can get that going from.
In manure, you were producing your own manure.
It's the same.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
the same. It's just a different approach, but it works either way. It works either way.
The big thing right now is what they call a bio, which is actually human waste.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
And I had a truckload of that stuff come in, and lack of equipment, I couldn't spread it, so it was just sitting there, and I won it in a raffle or something like that.
Did you win it, or did you draw the short straw?
Pulled my name out of the hat. 18 railroad load of
Whoa!
manure is coming in.
Wow. Woo.
Wow!
Like a waste treatment plant?
Yes.
Ah.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
And that their competitor is certainly chicken manure, but this stuff
Yeah.
is supposed to be coming along, but I never got to experiment with it because it just stood
Oh,
there
yeah.
in that house.
Oh, yeah.
Well, they do.
Spreading it out.
Yeah, I was gonna
They
say, can you
do-
scatter some seed on top of
Right.
it and just sort of see, like, you can graze them up on top of it.
They do. I mean, it's used in China. I mean, they do a lot of it in China.
Back in the day, they always used it for tomato beds.
Right.
That kind of stuff.
Right.
Cake.
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
I think one of the things that, and I was so glad that Meredith pointed this out in her talk of just what I think is kind of hard to understand right now, or to get the consumers to understand, is the big push for veganism, and getting away that we can't raise animals and livestock, and we shouldn't be eating meat. And if we did that, I mean, our landscape's going to look very different. We need them. I mean, they're the only thing that can take this, something with very few micronutrients, like grass, and eat it, and then provide us with macro amounts of these nutrients. And we can't do that. Humans can't do that. We don't have the ability to do it, and we need these ruminants in order to do that. So they're important, and they keep the landscape alive. I mean, if we didn't have them, it just goes dead. And I've seen enough places like that in my work with extension, even just, in Vermont, old farms that have been left and neglected, that it just kind of goes dead. I mean, there's stuff growing, but not very lively.
One of the other things that they're doing now, or talking about, is intense grazing.
Mm-hmm.
A whole bunch of them in there, what we call overgrazing, and put them in there because you want the manure.
Sure.
And then move them out. I see y'all doing rotation, so you're not getting that whole lot of intense.
Well, you can, and I'm sorry, I should have sort of said something to that effect. That's what I think observation is so important for, because sometimes you do want to do it very intensely, and then other times it's like, oh, that isn't the way to do it at this spot at this time. But you might want to do that at a different time. So I don't feel like we should have uniform I think the term adaptive. So you adapt to the conditions of the time and place and animals for that particular spot. And it has to be adjusted. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things in the work that we do, because so often, farms ask us, well, I want you to tell me how to do this. And I said, well, I can give you the tools. And I can tell you how to use it, but you've got to spend the time out there on your land listening to what it's telling you and work with it. It's a conversation, and it's not the same answer every day. Some days it says, no animals here. I can't handle animals. And then another time you come back and it's like, yeah, bring them all.
And the principles are the same.
Yes.
Good grazing principles are the same no matter where in the world you graze. It's just how you apply them, and that's what's doing. So I have one last slide I wanted to share before we wrap
yes.
this up. Thank you so much for letting us share our stories and experiences with you all. And I wanted to let you all know about a new podcast that is launching in just a few short weeks. We're doing interviews already. And it's Choosing to Farm, and it's focused on folks who are first generation, or folks who maybe skipped a generation, or even folks, we've got some great examples of folks who left the farm and came back to the farm or the ranch. It's aimed at livestock folks all over the country, and just to be able to share their stories about what they've learned, and so good stuff and not so good stuff. Regular question that I've been asking folks is, what has your worst day been? And boy, there's some really interesting answers to what is the worst day that you can think of in what you've been doing. And the goal, the ultimate goal of all of this is we want there to be more people. It totally resonated with what Chad said today too. We want more farmers, we want more ranchers, we want more people who are doing this, and we want them to come into this hearing from other people who have come into this about the good things and the not so good things. So we get people coming in realistically who recognize there are going to be bad days, and there's going to be moments of beautiful joy and successful businesses around this too. So I've got some handouts straight out those doors. If you want to grab my contact information, I've got recording equipment. I could even talk to somebody today if you wanted, or reach out to me. We'd love to hear from all different kinds of folks. So thank you so much. And you can subscribe already on Apple or Spotify.
And Kimberly,
Thanks, Rob.
Jennifer, one thing
Yes.
I want you to get out of this. They're doing something. A piece of land that's not managed has very little value, and it's going to deteriorate. Anything you do, in doing it different. Every day is a different day. The environment's constantly changing. What you learn changes. You add to it, you take away. As long as you don't disturb the soil, what you do on top, it enhances that. And I've been in fairly intensive rotation for 50 years on my operation. It is unbelievable the changes have taken place. And I have exceeded what I thought it could do
Great.
when I was in school. I don't know where we're going from here, but I know that there's still more to be done. We're learning more about fungal microbial activity or carbon sequestration in that soil. But that doesn't happen without active management. And it doesn't matter if you have a quarter of an acre.
Mm-hmm.
If you'll work it, I mean, that's a chicken operation. Or bees, something like that. And then as you get larger, you can have more diversity. You can go single species, but work the land and make observations. When you see something, if you make a mistake, that's okay. You can start correcting it. You may make several mistakes. The land's forgiving, but continue to work and care. If we care, we'll come out ahead. Everybody wins. But anyway, thank y'all so very much for your
Thanks.
presentation. And
Yeah, thanks.
we'll look forward to you doing another one for us. There's no end to
Another
it.
few years.
That's right. If you have any more questions, y'all want to hang around and answer
Oh,
them,
yeah, Bert.
you've got all till the next program.
Guys.